Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So this is the first session of the Sutta studies for the Rains Retreat 2023. And the main theme of this series of talks is the Eightfold Path in detail. Probably at the end of it, hopefully at the end of it, you'll have some overview of the fundamental teachings of the Buddha. And depends how detailed we get, but should be detailed enough for about 10 talks, even though it's only Eightfold Path, but I got to stretch it a little bit to find 10. But before I go into the main theme, it may be helpful to introduce a little bit about the sources, because this is about the sources of the Buddha's teachings, fundamental teachings, and our Theravada tradition has a body of scriptures, usually referred to as in English as the Pali Canon, which is the collection of teachings preserved in the Pali language. So we are fortunate to have this now available to us in many languages, particularly English. And this is, in Pali, it's called Tipitaka. The T is 3. Pitaka means literally baskets. So it's 3 main collections. As you see on the board there, the Vinaya Pitaka, Sutta Pitaka, and Abhidhamma Pitaka. The Vinaya is the collection of the rules, regulations, procedures of the monastic order, the Sangha of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, and there is also some historical material in it. It's not just a list of a whole bunch of rules. I mean, there are quite a few, elaborations of the rules, but it's kind of couched in a historical context. So it starts off soon after the Buddha's awakening and tells the story of the Buddha's his beginning of establishing the order, the Sangha, because this book is all about the Sangha. The second one is the Sutta Pitaka, which is a collection of the Buddha's teachings, discourses in various forms. So a lot of them are just dialogues, records of dialogues of the Buddha talking to different people or giving discourses to the monks or lay people. And some of them are in verse, sort of loose verse. Some of them are kind of a mixture of prose and verses, and there's even one collection at the fifth one. The 4 main ones that are listed there. There's the Digha Nikaya, which means long discourses. It's a collection of 34 different discourses the Buddha gave. Some of them are reasonably long, and some of them are not so long. But anyway, they put them all together. The second one is called the Majjhima Nikaya, which is the middle-length sayings, 152 discourses. They roughly divide into certain chapters with the Brahmins or the bhikkhus, or with other wandering ascetics. And then the next one, the Samyutta Nikaya. When these are referenced, they can be either by the Pali name or by the English translation. So you got to be a bit clever how to figure them out if they're referenced. The third one is called Samyutta Nikaya, and trying to put the Buddha's teachings into an order according to topic. There's a whole bunch of different discourses Buddha gave at different times, all about the six senses, the five groups of grasping, etc., etc., etc. And then the fourth one, the Anguttara Nikaya, is different discourses, teachings, which are organized according to number. The ones, the twos, the threes, the fours, the Eightfold path, right, up to the 11s. Some of them are a little bit cobbled together to get some of them have to put two together, see, the six this and the four that or something to get 10 or something, but it's trying to give some order to it. Some people, of course, maybe realize that some people like numbers. They remember numbers easier. Some people like topics. Some maybe like stories. So there's a whole range of different approaches the Buddha used. And the fifth one is called Khuddaka Nikaya, which is hardly known. People don't know that name. But it's a loose collection of 15 different books of varying ages and different kind of content. Probably the most famous one or well-known one is called Dhammapada, collection of verses. But there's also the Jataka stories of the Buddha's previous lives, apparently. And there's a Sutta Nipata, another one, which is mainly verse, primarily in verse, maybe a short prose introduction. And there are actually two books, at least two books, which are not even the Buddha's words. The Thera Gatha and the Teri Gatha. These are the verses, the Gatha means verse, the verses of the elders, the elder monks, the Thera, and the elder nuns, Teri, the enlightened nuns and monks. So they have these, when, you know, I don't know if you can imagine or not, but when you're enlightened, you have great joy. So then they were inspired to write some verses of their breakthrough or their enlightenment process, you see. It's been quite inspiring sometimes to read some of these stories, these verses of, you know, the kind of poetry of enlightened people, which you don't get too often in the West anyway. No. But it was considered to be so significant that it was included in the official Pali Canon, accepted as official word. And because they were disciples of the Buddha, and basically it's about teachings of the Buddha too, then it was accepted as, you know, the Buddha's word, if you like. So the Pali Canon is reputed to be the word of the Buddha, although it's a little bit, stretching a little bit, because the third collection, the Abhidhamma Pitaka, just by the language alone, is recognized by scholars to be written down quite a long time after the Buddha passed away. So it's not the Buddha's word. But it was an attempt by senior monks, senior disciples, to put together in a systematic form the Buddha's teachings. Sometimes it was a bit too systematic for some people. It's just a bit too intellectual sometimes. So anyway, this is what's called the Pali Canon, and then when we want to find out the fundamental teachings of the Buddha, it's best to go back to the source. And we're very fortunate in Theravada to have this source available to us, even though it's in the Pali language, which has, you know, pros and cons. And in the negative sense is that it has to be translated into modern languages. So thus we get a variety of translations. And some, especially the early translators, most of them were not Buddhists. So when they translated, it was very much more literal, if you like. They were maybe scholars, Pali scholars, and very knowledgeable about the language, but not necessarily about the context. So some of the early translations, they get a bit strange sometimes, but over the years now, most of them have been supplanted anyway. They've been supplanted by more reliable or authentic translations, particularly by an American monk called Bhikkhu Bodhi. He probably is the most authoritative and and reliable translator of the Pali Canon at this time, this present day and age. And he's been very diligent. You can imagine translating all these texts, not all of them, but I mean, he has the middle-length discourses, middle-length sayings. He edited a version by some other previous monk in Sri Lanka who did it, an English monk. And the other two, Samyutta and Anguttara, he translated himself. And these are now in English in the Wisdom publications editions. They're a book this thick. Yeah. So not to be taken lightly. Not to be read at night either, I think. But these teachings, of course, as the Buddha emphasized, are to be contemplated and reflected upon. One advantage, I guess you can say, of having different translators is that one gets a variety of different angles on things. Sometimes translations have been become very familiar, so it becomes a little bit like jargon. So some words are translated, Pali words translated to English, and people don't actually know what they mean, but they just hear this word so often, they just, okay, right, I hear about it. The five groups of grasping, what's that? But it's just the way it's been translated so long that, okay, you think you know it. Whereas if you have read a different translation, you might get a different angle on it. Somebody has a different approach to it. So on one of the groups of categories, the five groups of grasping, in my latest book, I took a risk and did some radical translation. It remains to be seen whether it's just thrown in the garbage bin or the garbage bin of history. I don't think it'll take off exactly, but I tried to make an effort to explain it in a different way. At the very least, people have to think about it. Think if my translation is appropriate or if the other translations were better. But unfortunately, it's, sometimes if we just hear the same translation, we just think we know it. Something like karma. We think we all know karma, right? Wait till later, I'll explain the real karma. Not the popular version. So you might get a bit shocked. I don't know. Anyway, next time, about two talks later, I think, when I come to the second of the factors of the Eightfold Path. But the positive side of having it in a Pali language is that here is a root text. So even though you have all these translations, modern language changes over time. As you know, I mean, the language we use now is different than people used 100 years ago, isn't it? The early translators of the Pali Canon were in the Victorian era. So when you read that, it sounds a bit funny, a bit stilted, actually, because language has changed these days. So if we keep using the translation, translated to English, ye old English, from Middle Ages to Victorian English to English today, it keeps changing, and so the meaning gets lost. Whereas we have the Pali Canon to go back to. This is even though it's unlikely to have been the word of the Buddha, the language the Buddha spoke, but it's definitely very, very close to it. Sanskrit, Pali, and then Sanskrit, and another one, Prakrit, were all very similar in northern India, and dialects coming out of them too were very similar. So by having this root language, this root source, we can go back to it, and basically it is very, very unlikely to change. On the negative side of that, of course, the culture in India in the 5th and 6th century BC, very different than it is today. People thought differently. So some of these concepts which came from the time of the Buddha in the Pali language, they come to us today, and it's very hard to get our head around it sometimes because they thought differently. But at least it provides, in the Buddhist context, or context of especially meditation practice, it provides a theme for contemplation. That's the main thing. In Buddhism, a belief system isn't that important. It's just words to point us in the right direction towards a direct experience. So, having the exact word isn't so important. Of course, if you get the wrong sign, you end up in Webb's Creek, right? Rather than Wiseman's Ferry. So it does help to have, a reasonable, correct sign, but it isn't so important. It's not so fundamental. Mainly to use it to contemplate. Is this the right way or not? Is this the correct way, correct understanding or not? Until we have direct realization, and then you know for yourself, no doubts anymore. If anybody who has delved into the Pali Canon will come across maybe a few challenges, because this came from an oral tradition. In Buddhist times, sacred teachings were only given orally. They weren't written down. So the Pali Canon was preserved orally for about 300 years. And then the tradition is written down in Sri Lanka in the 1st century AD, 1st century BC, committed probably to, I don't know if they wrote it in Pali or in Sinhala language, but anyway, it was written down finally. But the first few hundred years it was preserved orally. And this may sound a bit, unbelievable to people today, but because they had to rely upon oral teachings, people had trained their memory very well. So they were very, very good at memorizing things, which today people are losing it. Why memorize things when you got a computer? Let the computer do it, remember for you, all your lists of telephone numbers and stuff. And remember, I had an aunt, and she had a photographic memory. She could remember people's phone numbers, for decades. She was like a walking computer. Because that was part of her job. She was a owner of a shop, so she remembered people's phone numbers and their names and their family background, and she was amazing. People would meet her in the street, in the aisles of the shop. Oh, you're so and so, and you have kids and children, and remember their names, and she just trained to do that. Then she had to make all the orders for the things in the shop. It was a supermarket, actually. So it's a lot of stuff in a supermarket. She had to remember all the prices and the numbers for them and all this. So she trained herself that way, just naturally. So it can be trained. But there is a few, for oral tradition, of course, there is certain supporting techniques. One is repetition. The more you repeat something, the easier it gets changed from short-term memory to long-term memory. So there is a lot of repetition in these scriptures, and a lot of stock phrases. They just instead of somewhere you might expect, the Buddha's giving some original teaching to somebody, you may expect kind of a more personalized discourse. Then you get a stock phrase. This person came along and bowed to the Buddha and sat down on the right side, and he didn't say, "Hello there, Mr. Gautama." It's very formalized and stock phrases, and fortunately some of the good translators or modern translators have deleted a lot of the repetition, so one can read it more coherently, I guess you can say. But if you're trying to remember it, then to remember the repetition is very helpful. It becomes automatic then. And also, we have to take into account that almost all the Sutta Pitaka anyway is what we call narrative. Somebody remembered the bhikkhu's personal attendant, the Buddha's personal attendant Ananda, remembered all the teachings of the Buddha. So that's why most of them start off with, "Thus have I heard." He's narrating what he heard. So and then he just gives us what he heard. It's like it's like reporting the information he received in this discourse while he's sitting there listening. You see. So sometimes there's not only teachings in it, but there's also a lot of other information. It's the place and the time, the place anyway. The Buddha was teaching at Savatthi or somewhere, and this person came to him and talked to him. But the information sometimes then, if you want to get some basic teaching, sometimes it's a bit hard to find in the scriptures because you have to look through different dialogues. And the Buddha taught for 45 years. So, and he was a teacher, usually, quite often, I guess, traveling with many other people and going to different places. So basically the Buddha had to talk a lot, for 45 years. And this is all recorded. And some of the ways of the Buddha taught, of course, he was, he just repeated himself also. So there are sections of the scriptures which are just repeating they say the Buddha was at this place, and he said this, same place, not different place, same thing again, you see. But if you have an overview of the scriptures, like for example, the Samyutta Nikaya, according to topic, then you have a topic in your mind, the six senses, for example, then you can go to that chapter and look at it. Or if you remember that it's the six senses, you go to the Anguttara Nikaya, to the sixes, the book of the sixes, and you can find the six senses then. Otherwise, some of them are scattered through the longer discourses. You just have to know where to look for them then. So that's why sometimes it can be helpful to have a study course where the teacher does the donkey work to look it up, and fortunately I have lots of notes, so it's not so difficult. And of course the translations in English, they do have a very good index, and so you can always look in the back, and somebody will be very diligent to put a very good index, and so you can look up the Eightfold Path, and you can find it in all of these scriptures probably have the Eightfold Path mentioned at some time or other. So over the years, the Pali Canon has been translated, and virtually all those books, the last one has 15 books in it. I mentioned a few there, but those ones have all been translated, I think. Almost all these books have been translated to English now, a very reliable translation. And the benefit is, of course, that these teachings are available to us now so that we're able to read them, contemplate, reflect upon them, and get some pretty good understanding of what the Buddhist teachings is. Then, of course, it's up to us to practice. So coming to the practice, back to the Eightfold Path again. The Eightfold Path is, you can say the comprehensive path to awakening the Buddha gave. Put it down to 8 steps. You can say, well, eight different processes to develop. Sometimes it's reduced to 3. There's nice three neat categories. The wisdom part, first 2, right view, right aspiration. Then there is morality, right speech, right action, right livelihood. Then there is the meditation part, right energy, right mindfulness, right collectedness. This is what's called the 3 trainings. And in the Eightfold Path, according to sort of historical context, was introduced very early on in the Buddhist teachings. In the very first discourse, the Buddha introduced this. That was the reading I put on the board there. The setting in motion of the wheel of Dhamma discourse. So the Blessed One, the Buddha was staying in the deer sanctuary at Isipatana. And so he gave this teaching to the first five disciples, first 5 monks he met. These 2 extremes, bhikkhus, should not be followed by one who has gone forth. sensual indulgence, which is low, coarse, vulgar, ignoble, and unprofitable, and self-torture, which is painful, ignoble, and unprofitable. By avoiding these two extremes, the Buddha has realized the middle way, which gives vision and understanding, which leads to calm, penetration, enlightenment, to Nibbana. And what is this middle way? This middle way which leads to Nibbana. It is this Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path, namely right view, right aspiration, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right collectedness. So this is the middle way understood by the Buddha to produce vision, knowledge, leads to calm, penetration, enlightenment, to Nibbana. So if you have a short memory, and you only need to remember 8 things, that's all you need to know. Those 8 things as the teachings of the Buddha. Those eight categories, the Eightfold Way, the 8-factored way. If you remember them, you practice them, then you can realize Nibbana. It's all you need. Or you can put it into 3 if you like: morality, meditation, wisdom. And of course, these 8 are also, they also can be expanded into, I think it's 28 altogether. There's 4 kinds of right collectedness, 4 kinds of mindfulness, developing mindfulness, 4 kinds of right effort, etc. That's what I mean by the Eightfold Path in detail. But already just having that information, these 8-factored path to awakening, is already, I think, very, very reassuring, isn't it? If you have faith in the Buddha, the awakened one, the enlightened one, here he's just saying all you need is those 8 factors. All through history, human beings have been searching for enlightenment, for perfect truth or something or other, enlightenment, whatever, perfect happiness. And they've all come up with all kinds of different ideas all through the history of humanity. I mean, different religions, different philosophies, all kinds of things. But the Buddha comes along and says, "This is it, folks. This is it. I found the way." Yeah? You say, "Oh, thank you. Whew, I can relax now." He's already trod the path. He already traveled this path and found the result of it, realized the result of it, and it works. Yeah? Most of us, we hear the different paths. Somebody says, "Oh, try this. You got to try this method, this philosophy, or this religion, or something." And well, you can spend your whole life maybe trying it out, but will you get to the end? Doubt, don't know yet. But here the Buddha was somebody who had got to the end of the path. He's talking from the end of the path. We're talking from the very beginning, most of us. We don't know what's what yet. We're still searching. We're searchers yet. But the Buddha's already got there. He's already got to Nibbana. He's already got to the end of the path and says, "Okay, there it is. Follow these steps and you get there too." Yeah. The only sort of, extra thing about it is we have to travel that path ourselves. You just can't worship the Buddha or have faith in him. You have to practice what he says. Follow that Eightfold Path yourself. Put it into your life. So, and if you, just hearing those 8 factors, do you notice something about them? The main thing is they're all within you. They're all subjective things. The Buddha's not saying you need to believe in something else outside. Do you have to go to the moon first? Or you have to go do somewhere else? It's all within your own mind. The right view, right aspiration, the morality, the wisdom arises in your own mind. So you have everything within you already. It's already there. You just need to develop it and cultivate it. Totally self-contained right there within yourself. Of course, the trick is, putting it into practice. Most of us are coming from unrealization. We haven't quite realized it yet. So we got to study, what does this mean? And the way it's laid out, 8 factors. In the very beginning, the first 2 factors, right view, right aspiration, they go under what's called the wisdom category. But later, it seemed to change. And then it was morality came first. Not in the Eightfold Path, but is with us 3 trainings, for example. So then the Buddha, more often, later in life anyway, he talked more about developing morality. And then morality, once it's developed, it becomes a support for collectedness, meditation. Once meditation is developed, it becomes a foundation for wisdom. And sometimes there are 2 more factors added to it, right knowledge and right liberation. Liberation is nibbana. Or I think practically speaking, maybe it's going to be more helpful to look at it not as 8-factored path, but as cyclical. Because the concentration, the collectedness, meditation leads back to right view again. Right view, right morality, it's like increasing. It's like, in a way, it's like a spiral, a helix, huh? Yeah. When you bring meditation to bear upon right view, then your view becomes more right. Yeah. The beginning is not, it's just, you can say maybe it's you have knowledge, understanding, but not yet wisdom. You have some understanding about basic principles, the Buddhist teachings, but have you realized it yet? But if you develop meditation practice and then contemplate nature of your mind, nature of reality, then your view becomes different. Your view becomes more right, if you like. And if you have more right view, you recognize this, then the morality is you see the point of morality then, the point of living a skillful life. At first, maybe you just take it on faith, or it sounds like a good thing to do, or your mother told you or something, but after a while you realize, oh, that's why living a skillful life is helpful. It provides a lot more calmness of mind, peace of mind, freedom from remorse, doubts, worries, fears, which provides a good basis for collectedness then. Deeper meditation. Deeper meditation provides more space for reflection, contemplation, which gives rise to more wisdom again. So usually it goes in sort of like a cycle. And ideally, these increase, they're trainings. So just like you physically train to build up your muscles, you train in morality, meditation, wisdom, and those qualities increase. They get stronger and stronger. So it's like the mind is now rising up higher and higher, you can say. You get clear insight, you get better meditation, you get more refined morality or ways of living. So it increases, growing and growing and growing until, the so-called enlightened being, the arahant, is beyond all those. They have a perfectly pure life. They have the best meditation, and they have the highest wisdom. And they realize the ultimate goal of the practice. It usually goes in stages like this. It's a matter of trying to develop these qualities, and I think it should be seen more like as an 8-factored way. Some people maybe think, oh, I've got to do the first one first, and then next step. I used to think it was like a ladder. You go up the stages. First right view, which could take a long time, 10 lifetimes. Next up the ladder. But you get a little bit of right view that gives you an appreciation of right aspiration, gives you appreciation of the value of skillful living. Skillful living gives you more peace of mind for meditation practice, and so it increases. Then you go back to the beginning again and straighten out your view a bit more. They support each other, these 3. Ajahn Chah gave the analogy, it's just like a stick, one stick, with 3 parts to it. It's a beginning, middle, and end, you see. But it's all one stick, so you got to see it together, rather than separation. But sometimes, if you know these all work together, then you can contemplate. If your meditation is not developing, well, meditation, the Buddha is saying that, a skillful living gives a good support for meditation practice. So if meditation isn't developing, perhaps you have to go back to your lifestyle again. Refine your lifestyle. Look at your way you're living your life. Just some worries and some sense of dis-ease in your life because you haven't been speaking rightly, you haven't perfected your right speech yet, or maybe your livelihood is not in harmony with your spiritual aspirations yet. So when you sort that out, then you find meditation gets better now. If you don't realize there's not much wisdom arising, perhaps you have to go back and look at the source in meditation then. Why is wisdom not developing? Because meditation is not very peaceful, not very calm, not very spacious. So then I'll work on meditation then. And then the 3 factors in meditation: energy, mindfulness, collectedness. Which one of those is not really in harmony now? Maybe this energy is not as flagging. You got to balance the energy out. I'll mention more details about these individual factors, but perhaps you can appreciate how they all work together. They need to be balanced out and support each other, cause and effect. So we're very fortunate to have this teaching available to us, that we know at least what the factors we have to concern ourselves with are. And like I said, these factors are very subjective within us. So, the Buddha pointed out, like when the Buddha talked about views, there are some kind of views which are just not worth bothering about. Trying to consider about whether the world is eternal or not, whether there's heaven or hell or not. How do you know? Those are not really important questions. You should be looking at the sources of our practice within ourselves in terms of the Eightfold Path. These are factors which are beneficial for developing the path and realization of Nibbana then. So we have limited time and limited energy in this life. Better to be able to focus it in the right direction. The Eightfold Path. If you're wandering around here, you want to get to Wiseman's Ferry, you're wandering around here and you think, I'll go that way. No, you won't get the Wiseman's Ferry maybe if you go around the earth. Keep going east, you get you back here again to the west, but it'd be a long time, you see. But if you set your compass and you know where, okay, Wiseman's Ferry is that way, okay, right, that's right, I'll go in that direction. At least you know that get the right direction first anyway. And then check it out as you go along. Is it really working? Developing these qualities, is it really working? And you got 8 qualities to juggle, I guess, or kind of work with, so it won't be so easy to find out, but you put it into practice and find out for yourself. That's the main thing. And maybe sometimes it can be helpful to go back and to study, what these factors are in more detail. Just when people hear about the teachings, they hear something, of course they hear, sort of what's acceptable to them. They hear what's easy for them to understand first, And then you hear something again. Oh, yeah, now I get it a bit more clearer now. It's like slowly getting things into focus. When Ajahn Chah was teaching, I remember his teachings, and on one level, sometimes they were quite repetitive. Repeat the same things over and over again. Usually he got into a role sometimes, a certain theme, Then he'd repeat himself, but he would also elaborate more in more detail or a much deeper level or something. But the benefit was that when you hear something over and over again, right, the first time you think you know it. when you hear it again, right, now I see it's something a bit different here. And of course, he used to also remind us to listen with your heart, not with your head, which is a bit hard to do if you had to translate from Thai to English. I had to translate in my brain from Thai to English, but fortunately, after quite a few years, then I could think in Thai too. But in the beginning, it was translating. But the point was, you listen with your heart means that you're contemplating, you're trying to receive those teachings and not just filter it through your sense of self. You know, because some of the teachings that he gave were not necessarily comfortable. You know, especially when he talked about, for me anyway, he talked about unsatisfactoriness. You know, unsatisfactoriness. You know, the suffering of life, and sometimes I can feel the kind of resistance coming up. I don't want to hear that. I came here for happiness, peace of mind. I don't want to hear this suffering stuff. You know. But you know, after a while, it would be recognized. Oh, you know, there's something there. Why is there resistance to it? You're trying to, you know, he's talking about the nature of life, and here you refuse to accept it. You want the truth. Isn't truth opening to the way things really are in life? You know, not just how you want them to be. You know. By listening with your hearts, then hopefully you can put aside your own biases and prejudices and preferences, and just allow your heart to receive it. But it takes some practice, and this is really, in a way, this is really the purpose of collectedness or meditation, right? Mindfulness, developing the ability to just be aware of what is there. Not, you know, say a non-judgmental awareness. Just receive what's there rather than filter it through your own expectations or preferences. When the mind is much more calmer, you don't have your own defense mechanisms so prominent in your mind, so you can receive it much more easily. So over the course of the next, I think it's about 10 talks altogether, so 9 more, that I'll be going to the details of these different factors. Next time it'll be right view, which is a big one, the right view. I mean, in one sense, it's very simple, but it can also, there are many factors to it. And then the right aspiration. So I left the list of the 8 factors on the board outside there, with a permanent marker. No, it's not actually, but so it'll be there for a long time anyway. You can look at them, and I can give you some readings as we go along. Yeah. This one was very general, but as you go into the details, there's specific discourses the Buddha gave more details of right view, right aspiration, etc. So I'll do the donkey work and find out what they are and put on your reading list. And hopefully you'll be able to actually do your homework, so you'll be a little bit ahead of the game, you know, so you know what to expect. And even though these, you know, they're written down as, you know, simple factors, right view, right aspiration, sounds simple enough. When you contemplate them, you know, right view, your right way of looking at things. You know, this is a very, very big topic. And I think in the very beginning, the Buddha introduced that as the first factor because, well, initially, like when the Buddha was giving his first teaching, he wasn't teaching Buddhists. There's only one Buddhist in the world at this time when the Buddha gave his first teaching. It was only the one Buddhist in the world, the Buddha. So he was teaching people who didn't have that view, the Buddhist view. You know, the first 5 disciples, they were wandering ascetics. So I don't know where they came from, but they had all kinds of, in India at that time, it was very, very rich time of speculation, religious, spiritual speculation. So all kinds of teachers and views, and you know, if you read the Pali Canon, you'll come across the Buddha discoursing with different teachers from different religions. And some of them were very, very, very different from the Buddhas. So having the right view at least allows us to start off. If you already were attached to a certain view which didn't coincide with the Buddhas, then no, don't even listen. You don't even listen. Like the story was when the Buddha was walking to, after his enlightenment in Bodh Gaya, he had to walk to the deer park at Isipatana in Benares. I don't know how far it is. I mean, they had to walk for about a week, I think. A week's walking. He took his time, and he had to stop and collect his food too. Huh? No, he sat around Bodh Gaya, experiencing the bliss of enlightenment for 7 weeks. So anyway, but on the way he met this wandering ascetic, belonged to, apparently was an Ajivaka. He was this sect called the Ajivakas. And so the Buddha met this, and he recognized the Buddha was very radiant. So he says, "Oh, gee, you look like you're somebody special, And what's your teaching?" And then the Buddha said, "Well, the Buddha was, I guess he was a little bit, we say full of himself, if it's possible for an enlightened being. But anyway, he said, I am the all enlightened Buddha. I have found the way to enlightenment." And this Jivaka was so shocked. "Oh, really? Okay, bye-bye." Went the other way. But then the Buddha must have thought about this, and then when he got to Isipatana, he didn't say, "I am the all-enlightened Buddha." He said, "No, there is a way." He didn't say me anymore. He didn't say I'm enlightened. He said, "There is a way. The deathless has been found." See? Depersonalized it, you see. Presented it as a more objective approach rather than subjective, you see. So then the 5 disciples, they appreciated that, and they listened to him. Probably if he came up to them and said, "Look, I'm the enlightened one now. You guys don't know anything. I'm enlightened. Listen to me. Bye-bye." They go somewhere else. So anyway, the Buddha had, by then, he had recognized the need for, a particularly skillful method of teaching, and he, by the history, especially from his previous lives, he had already cultivated many wholesome factors which allowed him to be a Buddha. A Buddha is somebody who can teach, has realized the truth, and is able to teach as well. And they say that, in any age when there's one Buddha, there's 500 what they call Pacceka Buddhas, people who have realized the truth, but they aren't able to teach. And there was even one, well, he passed away now, but he was quite active maybe 10 years ago. And there was a Sri Lankan monk staying in Amaravati. And he knew this teacher, famous teacher. I won't mention his name in case I get sued. But anyway, he was very, very popular at the time. And the Sri Lankan monk knew him because this Sri Lankan monk was about 90 years old. So he traveled around India and Sri Lanka and had met many different teachers and leaders and whatnot. So when he was staying in England, he wanted to go meet this teacher who was visiting England at the time. So the monks took him there to this place where he was staying, and he had his personal meeting with him. They chatted together like old friends, and then they left, and the monk who was accompanying this senior Sri Lankan monk in the car with him back to Amaravati, he asked him, "Oh, well, how was the meeting?" He said, "Oh, yeah, great." He says, "Great, yeah. We had a good talk together," he said. And he said, "What do you think about him?" He said, "Well," he said, "Oh, yes, he's somebody we call Pacceka Buddha," he said. Which was, in a way, one of the greatest compliments that he was enlightened, but one of the biggest insults that he couldn't teach. And here this teacher was very famous around the world, but according to the Sri Lankan monk, he can't teach. He can't teach the right way, you see. So even though he was enlightened, apparently, he claimed he was enlightened, but he couldn't teach. So don't ask me to mention his name. But, so there are many different people, many different teachers around. So unless one has a very good understanding of what right view is, one can easily be taken off on a different route. You know, people have, I would say, even can have a, some kind of a so-called enlightened experience, but they don't know how to present it in the right way. Just their charisma spills out, and it can be very, very convincing, but they don't really know the right path to follow. And so they aren't able to teach you the right path either. So, yeah. So that's next week's topic. So just to whet your appetite. So anyway, this series of talks on the Eightfold Path will continue on Tuesday at 2 o'clock, I guess, in the future, once a week.